What's happening, folks? Welcome back to another episode of Deckard Unicorn. My name's Martin.
My name is Shona.
And thank you once again for tuning into our wee podcast, which, as you know, is free on all major podcast platforms. But if we were to charge for it, Shona, how much would you pay for it?
I'd buy that for $1. Oh, yes.
So, if you've listened to any of our podcasts before, you probably know we always start with a crap joke.
Oh, no, now you've said it, though, we're going to have to keep it going.
We have to do it every time now, I think. It's become a thing, quite literally.
Excellent. Well, if that jarring quote was omnipresent in your upbringing, then you are probably familiar with Omni Consumer Products' future of law enforcement, RoboCop.
Hi. Murphy transferring in from Metro South.
Nice precinct.
Yeah, pretty good.
You work for a living down here, Murphy. Get your armor and suit up.
1987's RoboCop is our film for this week, and it was directed by Paul Verhoeven, a very famous Dutch director, and it stars Peter Weller, Nancy Allen, Ronnie Cox, Kurtwood Smith, Ray Wise, Miguel Ferrer, and a bunch of other people as well. So the story centres on a crime-ridden Detroit in the near future. I think it's
2043, apparently.
2043 it was, okay.
But apparently shoulder pads are still big.
Shoulder pads are still a thing. It's about Alex Murphy, who is a police officer who is murdered by a gang of criminals and subsequently revived by the mega corporation Omni Consumer Products, and he's programmed as a cyborg law enforcement unit called RoboCop. So that's the Wikipedia synopsis for everybody there.
In a nutshell.
In a nutshell, because they do it so concisely.
We get the best of both worlds. The fastest reflexes modern technology has to offer, onboard computer-assisted memory, and a lifetime of on-the-street law enforcement programming. It is my great pleasure to present to you RoboCop.
So the film, as we said, was directed by Paul Verhoeven. It came out in 1987, and it is the brainchild of Edward Neumeier, who was a Universal executive. I think he was a junior executive at the time, and he was actually just working on Blade Runner, funnily enough. Like, you know, it wasn't in like any capacity, like any important capacity. He was just helping out on set. He loved being part of the movie industry, loved being part of films. They were filming Blade Runner at the same time on the lot, so he was over helping out, and I think he actually made garbage on the set. You know,
That's an important job.
All that kind of stuff, just like random pieces of set. He was just trying to help out as best he could on the production. And after seeing their portrayal of robots, you know, the androids in that, and obviously they look very human. That was the whole idea of Blade Runner, more human than human. He got the idea of this robot cop who would be more machine than man initially. So he kicked around this idea for a few years and eventually met Michael Miner. They rewrote the script and it became closer to what we see now on screen as RoboCop. And then they tried to find a director, so found Paul Verhoeven, very famous Dutch director, and he's more of a kind of art house director at this point, you know, coming from that European school, that style. He was new to America at the time, I think, and they tried to get him involved. He hated it, the idea. So they gave him a script, and apparently the story goes he threw it over his shoulder and put it in the trash or whatever.
But luckily for us, his wife picked up the script and had to read through it, and actually pointed out to him that it was much more layered and nuanced than he'd maybe initially thought.
Yeah.
You know, there was a lot to work with, and actually she pointed out that there was a lot of good violence in it that he would probably quite enjoy.
Verhoeven, I didn't know this, he actually lived through the Second World War. I mean, it makes sense from his age, but it's not something you sort of bring forward in your mind. But he lived through that, and he's got a very different idea of violence and the consequences of violence. So it was a very interesting project, him, after he sort of read through it. There was some changes he wanted to make initially, so he wanted to take out the family. And make Murphy
a bachelor.
A swinging
man,
dick.
Man's man, man about town.
Exactly. But yes, Ed Neumeier sort of fought for the family, so to speak. But, you know, they had to sort of reduce the role. So the family only appears, as you see in the final film, the family only appears sort of very briefly, and they're just there as a kind of tragic memory.
It's kind of like, flashbacks rather than, you know, you don't meet him having breakfast with his family or anything like that. It's only like as he starts to recall parts of his memory that you start to see that aspect.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's really good that they actually kept it in there. I think it actually works. I wouldn't have liked to see, you know, Murphy just as a playboy or whatever.
Exactly. It's got more to live for, more to survive for if he's got that family background. Well, that's the impression you're given anyway.
The writer Ed Neumeier made a good point in the documentary I watched, and he said that threatening home life is very important in American films. It's something that people like to see. It makes it dramatic, and it makes it something they can connect to. You know, when someone's trying to defend their family, defend their home.
I learned that from Home Alone. Parts 1, 2 and 3.
He very definitely defends you.
What are your prime directives?
Serve the public trust, protect the innocent, uphold the law.
So his overall concept was like anti-systemic science fiction and predatory capitalism. You know, so the idea is that these capitalist leeches are there basically taking everything they can possibly get from local communities, sucking them dry.
They're creating the problems so that they can then be paid to solve the problems.
Yeah, exactly. So that idea is, it's termed problem, reaction, solution. You know, where you create a problem, you then generate the reaction to it through the media and all that kind of stuff, and then you propose the solution. So you've got control over all three parts, and that's kind of what you see in this. So, like, we talk about the gentrification of the area, like Detroit, you know, it's supposedly a rundown city, and they're trying to breathe new life into it, as the old man says. So, but again, they are actually creating the problems. You know, they're hiring these gangs to cause problems, stretch the police force, destroy public buildings, and, you know, make it unsafe to live there, so people are leaving and all that kind of stuff. The shops are all being robbed and wrecked and blown up.
And essentially, they run the police force, don't they? Omni Consumer Products run the force, and they're trying to introduce more and more products and service contracts and things. So they, by undermining the police force, and at one point the police are so overstretched and they're all being murdered. So
they actually want to go on strike.
Yeah, they want to go on strike. And then RoboCop turns up.
Well, that's the reaction part of it. You know, you see Ronnie Cox plays Dick Jones, and you see one moment where he's on TV and he's saying, you know, they need help. You basically need our corporate help. We can offer you a solution to this particular thing. You know, the police clearly can't cope. So he's generating that reaction. You know, people, the public are then starting to cry out for help. You know, someone save us from this problem, this blight that's on our community. As you just said, they want to sell their product.
And actually the first product they want to sell is a much more violent and terrifying cybernetic creation, Ed 209. And we're introduced to him with quite a bang, but we can talk about that.
Quite literally, a lot of bangs.
many bangs.
A lot of bangs and a lot of splats. But yeah, I really love this idea that you've got both subjective and objective violence on screen. This idea that subjective violence happens to you, so you're a victim of a crime and you are driven by revenge, you know, and then there's the objective violence of like war, accidents, and just things that are out with your control that are perpetuated by big business, corporations, or governments, corrupt governments or whatever. So you've got all these things tied in together, and I think it's a really, really smart script. It's very, very tight, and it moves very, very quickly, and it never really fleshes out a lot of these points, but it gives you enough information to think about it. And I think that's why the stories become so enduring, and that's why the film itself just seems to get better with age, because a lot of the ideas and concepts in this film are very prescient, and you can see the things that happen in the film are still happening to this day. They're very obvious in the film, and nowadays we're a bit more subtle about how we hide these kind of injustices and this corruption. These things are still going on. Poor corporate governance, corporate greed, cronyism, all these kind of things.
Undermining public services to then allow privatisation.
Yeah, basically destroying public services in order to put a private company or a private contractor in charge of it.
So the film is set in Detroit, and obviously Detroit's got a history of machinery manufacturing, particularly car manufacturing.
That's right,
And there's been an economic downturn in the past years as that industry started to leave. So, you know, it seems like a good choice for an area that is needing regeneration and you know, is perhaps got problems with crime and economy and things like
exactly.
that.
I mean, that's going to happen, isn't it? You know, like big businesses and businesses in general start leaving a place. People are unemployed, they start to struggle, you know, then you start to get more and more crime. And the ripple effect of a corporate decision on local community. So right at the very top of this film, you've basically got one or two people making these decisions, and it's actually going to affect entire communities, and they don't have the interests of that community at heart.
Absolutely not.
All they want to do is bleed them dry. You know, so it's kind of crazy how that works. And I think both Ed Neumeier and Michael Miner were both against the Vietnam War. Detroit was used in that respect as well as kind of symbolic, because in this case they're going to be creating these machines of war, these robots to sort of pacify the urban places. And during the Vietnam War, Detroit actually built tanks for Vietnam.
Okay.
And they actually sent tanks from there to the Vietnam War. So obviously them being against it, that's another reason why Detroit was such an important place in that respect.
Come quietly or there will be trouble.
But for a film that has, quite dark underlying themes, it's actually pretty funny.
Yeah, it is. It's very satirical. It's darkly comedic. And we talked a wee bit about the violence. The violence is completely over the top.
Oh, yeah.
But it's to the point where it becomes absurd.
Exactly.
If you make it too realistic, you lose that edge to it. And they wanted to keep this kind of comedic edge. And there is lots of funny lines in it. I think Ed Neumeier wanted the death of Mr. Kinney in The Office. He thought that was hilarious.
Oh, that was so over the top.
Ed 209 completely destroying this guy.
You have 10 seconds to comply.
He just turns him into like a bag of ketchup.
Oh, can you imagine though how that scene always terrifies me? The thought of him being like, oh yeah, I'm just going to be this wee, just like a prop in this demonstration, and oh my god, I'm going to get shot to bits.
But yeah, he wanted that to be funny. Like he thought that he seen that as hilarious, and it is.
Because it's so excessive.
Because it's excessive, right?
It's like in Kill Bill when the bride is going nuts on the crazy AT and there's like arms flying and blood spurting. It's so hyper realistic that it's you can accept.
You can dismiss it.
Exactly.
As it's not real world violence anymore. It
doesn't affect
silly.
You in the same way.
Yeah, it's almost cartoon like. Yeah. And I think that's what it was going for. So Verhoeven was very in tune with that. And, it's a kind of parody on American action cinema as well, which was becoming more and more violent. You've got your Rambo and Commando and all these things. And it's just like the one-man army film, one guy basically just holds a machine gun and shoots 1,000 people, and they're just falling like flies. So this was his kind of Europeans' vision of America. This is how we see American cinema. This ridiculously over-the-top violence. But he took it even a step further. He changed action cinema in America, funnily enough, because more films started using that, like more squibs, more blood, it just became more and more gruesome.
Stocks and fake blood went up rapidly after that.
Yeah, so as we said, Verhoeven took the reins, and after a few rewrites, he was happy with what they were going to do. So I think it was the fifth draft that got greenlit, and they decided they were going to go and do it. So Columbia and Fox initially said, no, thank you.
Do you think it was the title?
Possibly. Again, like we said, Verhoeven was upset at the title initially, just like, what the fuck? RoboCop?
I would really have liked to be in the room where they sat down and decided that name.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can get away with it a few times. We've talked about this before about how there's certain films that have got really obvious names for what's happening in the film.
Snakes on a plane.
Snakes on a plane, right? You can look at it as like B-movie style and just think it's too obvious. Mega Shark. Or you get those silly, overly dramatic crap films like She Said No and He Had to Do It. It's things like that the names are terrible.
Yeah.
Almost like no thought going into it. And something like RoboCop sounds like there's no thought went into it. It's like, what's this film about? It's about a robot cop. All right, we'll call it RoboCop then. It seems like a simple leap to get there.
But is it inspired?
It might be, that's the thing. Some become iconic. Star Wars is another one.
Jaws
is another one. But they become iconic.
Yeah.
But you have to kind of have the craft and the sort of depth to back it up. So you might have a B-movie sensibility, which is what I love about this film, but it's very much A-level class.
Yeah, you've got to have the substance behind the style.
That's it. You've got great actors, you've got a great director, you've got a great creative staff, makeup effects and all that kind of stuff, Rob Bottin. It's very much an A movie with B-movie sensibilities.
Absolutely. I mean, this is quite often rated as one of the greatest movies of all time. It hits lists, top 10 movies, top 100 movies. All the time it is up there. And
I think as more and more younger people start to see it as well and realise how good it is, like a lot of these films, they just grow legs over time. And I think it's great to see younger people enjoying this and not shitting on it. And it is one of those films that's quite difficult to shit on because, as I said, it's still relevant.
And it's really held up very, very well.
Your move, creep.
So eventually after those studios said no, they went to Orion, and apparently the great thing about working for Orion Pictures at the time was the fact that there was practically no oversight. So the creatives had really strong voices within the studio. Your directors, your actors, your writers, they were able to basically make the film they wanted to make without somebody sitting on their shoulder saying, can't do this,
I think Superman should be in red and blue all the time. You can't put him in a black suit.
So yeah, we talk about that a lot in the modern world about movies made by committee and producers sticking their oar in where it doesn't belong, like trying to tell creatives what to do. So yeah, Orion Pictures were really well known for allowing their creatives just to do their work. And I think if this film had been made by a studio where you had meddling executives, it would have turned out very, very different. I think the fact that they got to make the film they wanted to make, is really important. So the film started shooting around 1986 at some point, I think. It was released in 1987, so I'm assuming it was filming around about 86, and they shot it in Dallas, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. Downtown Dallas for the most part. And it looks amazing still. You know, like, there's obviously things in the background that would make you think it's definitely the 80s. But the buildings...
There's things in the foreground that would make you think it's definitely the 80s.
But I think the choice of places, and Verhoeven did this really well with Total Recall as well, where he picked the right kind of buildings in the right environment so that it would have a lifespan.
Yeah.
They're
future-proof.
Exactly, they're future-proof a little bit, so they won't sort of date themselves too quickly. And a lot of the buildings and everything are obviously still standing.
Yep.
And they look very futuristic then, and they still look the same now.
And there is some use of mats and things like that, but the actual route was there.
Yeah, it's enhanced. And plus, they are trying to show a rundown city as well.
Exactly.
So the parts of it that maybe look of its time, you could just say are run down and they've been that way for maybe 30 or 40 years.
Exactly.
So, you can still get away with it. So I think it still works. They shot the steel mill sequence in Pennsylvania. That's a wonderful location. And there's something about shooting on location instead of green screening it.
Oh, yeah.
Nowadays, that would be green screened. You wouldn't have people lying in puddles of rusted water.
I know, I was thinking that. She's had a tetanus jug.
So, yeah, you wouldn't get that nowadays. They would just probably drop that in.
Whilst the producers may not have meddled too much in the final cut, one group of people who did were the classification board.
Yep, they certainly did. They had to go back to them about 100 times.
It was a crazy amount of times they had to go back. And they made them change some of the other things that were added in. So actually all the little fake adverts for like the Sports Hearts, Series 7, and the, good old family game Newcomb, get them before they get you.
Yeah.
All those were kind of added in later as well to lighten the tone a little bit more.
Yes, I am a cop.
So when was the first time you seen RoboCop? Was it on TV or was it video?
It was probably when it was on TV. So I would have been 2 when it came out. So it wouldn't have been for quite a number of years after that. So it would have been by the time it got TV to TV.
Well, you never seen it when you were 2?
Well, don't recall it. I definitely saw a very much pared back version of it.
Oh, you've seen the Why Me version?
Yeah, why me? Why me?
Instead of fuck me 400 times.
There was definitely less swearing and less violence. I remember closing my eyes and covering my ears for the scene when Murphy is killed. And so that would happen every time, and I would wait until my brother told me it was safe to look.
Yeah.
So that was how I got past that scene. Mm-hmm. And then years later, I accidentally watched, a director's cut or a more extended cut of it with the full horrific death of Murphy, and I was quite traumatised by it. I also have a memory of, so I don't know what age I would have been, maybe about 7. Back in the days when you used to make your own Halloween costume, you didn't go to a shop and buy a plastic creation. You sat down with your empty washing up liquid bottles and crafted.
You didn't have a 3D printer?
I didn't 3D print my costume or buy it from Ann Summers as people do now. Maybe not for children. So I remember my mum asked me what I wanted to dress up as that year, being like, very, very definitely I'm going to go as RoboCop.
Yes.
And I had this idea in my head that I would have this incredible suit and helmet, and even, I'd have the little leg holster that would pop out, and I would take my gun out, and then, when I was doing my party piece, that would be what I would do. I would take this gun out of my super ejecty holster and do the little the gun flip thing.
Oh yes.
And then put it back.
Magic.
And that would be my party piece. And I remember my mum sort of looking at me and being like, I think we've got the capability to cosplay you a RoboCop suit. It might end up looking like more like the Tin Man. I remember being like, can't believe she doesn't think we can pull this off. With an empty cornflakes pack and a packet of poster paint.
Get a colander on your head.
Yeah. But I definitely remember, the way another generation might have played cops and robbers or cowboys and Indians, we definitely played RoboCop.
The cut that you've seen is the same one that I had on video. I didn't see that cut initially. I seen the actual proper theatrical cut, but it totally blew me away. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. And I found it hilarious, awe-inspiring, and just amazing to look at. You know, like the concept, the character design. Ed 209 and RoboCop are just two of the best character designs ever, as far as I'm concerned.
So cool.
You know, I'd seen images of it, and lo and behold, my dad had it one night when I came home, watched it, and just couldn't wait to tell people next day in school about this thing. It had all the components that every young teenage guy, I suppose at that time anyway at least, was interested in, especially in my school, which was, you know, robots, shooting, blood, violence, swearing, you know, all that kind of thing. So
all that good stuff.
All that good stuff. There was the game. I remember the game was big at the time. Like Ocean made a game for the Commodore 64 and the Amiga and all that stuff. There was an arcade game as well. It was like Batman a little bit. You know, it was kind of ubiquitous. There was RoboCop everywhere for about a year. You couldn't really escape it. I think it was because it caused such a stir. You know, being so horrifically violent.
Yeah.
My dad never bothered with stuff like that. He always just told me it's just a film. It's just ketchup, or it's just an effect. You know, nobody's really dying. They're just actors. You know, they do this for a living. And I had that sort of idea from a very young age.
Yeah.
So I was allowed to watch a lot of stuff that you probably shouldn't watch when you're a kid. But I kind of seen it through a more fun lens.
Like fictional.
Really fictional, yeah. Like, I never ever thought of it as real. You know, obviously I got invested in it, loved the characters, loved the stories, all that kind of stuff. But those are the kind of things that hit me later, maybe.
Yeah.
You know, I was just engrossed as a kid by robots fighting, essentially, and shooting each other. And the bad guys were just so different and diverse. You know, like Clarence Boddicker's such a cool bad guy, but he's not your typical. He just looked like an accountant or something.
Yeah,
you know?
those rimless glasses.
Yeah, there was so much about it that just drew me to it. And ever since then, I've watched it a couple of times a year at least. It always gets better. It made a huge impression on me, and it's still one of my favourite films of all time. What was it for you that sort of drew you to it and would make you watch it now?
I've always really loved films that give a glimpse into a potential future, like what the future might look like. It's something that still fascinates me now, how things are going to turn out, what technology are we going to have, what are people going to be wearing. I really love those films from the 80s, like Total Recall and things like that, and the sort of aesthetic of those. I'm also a big fan of a kind of dystopian future film. I don't know how I feel about them now that I'm living in a dystopian future, but it's something that I've always really enjoyed. And I just think it's such a good sort of all-rounder film. It's very lean, great adventure. And there's a couple of things that I really love about it. I love the way the robots move. I love the way Ed 209 moves. I love the way RoboCop moves. And we'll talk about that later. And I love like the sounds. I just think they make the character sort of bigger. Yeah,
absolutely. I think the dystopian future thing is definitely my favourite kind of game and film and book and any kind of media with that in it. I'm always immediately drawn to it. The idea of what would happen if everything went to shit, or
and now we know.
And now we know. Or also the idea of what would happen if corporations controlled everything. I suppose you could say that is kind of happening nowadays. But what would that world look like? There's the huge separation between the rich and the poor. Those things have always fascinated me as well. And again, it's only when you get older you start to kind of appreciate that kind of storytelling. But as you said, I think you made a good point there that this film is tight. It could quite easily get bogged down in a lot of these themes, but it just gives you nuggets of information, gives you things to think about. They do it very, very cleverly without stalling the plot. The pacing is rapid in this. It just moves through the story very, very quick. There's not a single moment in this film where it feels like it's lagging.
Or laboured in any way. It's very, very tightly edited and very well put together. This is a perfect example of a really well-paced movie. Where you get everything you need from every scene without any fat, and it just moves on. Never feels like anything is missing. But again, as I said, there's plenty to think about if you want to think about it. But if you just want to sit and be entertained.
Exactly. So it ticks a number of boxes in that respect. And I think Nancy Allen said that in the interview I watched with her. There's so many layers to it. You can just kick off your shoes and have a popcorn flick for an hour and 45 minutes. Or you can dig a bit deeper into what it means to be a human. And the nature of reality and what future's going to look like.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
The eponymous RoboCop is played by Peter Weller, who I keep wanting to call Paul Weller.
Yeah, it's not Paul Weller.
It's not Paul Weller.
He'd have been rubbish in this.
Although he does get himself into a jam.
Oh, yes, indeed.
So Peter Weller plays Murphy, happy-go-lucky cop.
Not a mark on him.
Fresh-faced, cheekbones that could cut glass. And he is transferred into a new station.
Yep, Metro South.
hard neighbourhood.
Certainly is, and they work for a living down there, don't they?
Sure do.
So yeah, Murphy gets transferred in, and he is partnered up with Anne Lewis, who is going to show him the ropes. And he goes out on his first bust, really, isn't it, pretty much?
I think so, yeah.
And they're just driving around, they go for a coffee. So a wee bit of a coffee
in a
first.
square cup, which is pretty cool.
Yeah,
that's how you know it's the future.
That is a futuristic
I'm
cup.
waiting for my square cup and my jetpack
Get on that, Starbucks.
and my COVID vaccine.
Yeah, he's on his first bust, essentially, and before you know it, they're getting shot at by
Pretty grim.
by the Boddicker gang. There's a really cool setup here in that, you know, in the first media break, you see that Clarence Boddicker is known notoriously as a cop killer. So when you see that Murphy's obviously chasing this guy, yes, you know it's going to turn out bad. So yeah, they go in without backup, and Murphy he basically gets blown to bits.
It's pretty grim.
It's really gruesome.
First they blow off his hand,
Yeah.
then they blow off his arm,
Yeah.
then they blow off his face. Or the back of his head, really.
Yeah, they pretty much blow off everything they can. But
It's not that kind of film, Martin.
it's not RoboCock. Sorry. I love that sequence. Boddicker comes forward. You know, Emil says, "Your ass is mine," and he says, "Nope, not yet." And it's Murphy's face, the realisation, like, shit, that's the guy.
Yeah.
So it's that moment where it's a kind of, I'm not getting out of this.
Yeah.
What I love about it, though, is his bravery in the face of that. You know, he knows he's probably not going to survive this. So, you know, he's a bit cheeky. And when he says, "Buddy, I think you're slime," you know, that kind of stuff. They're trying to intimidate him and he's just not having it. It's like, if you're going to kill me, kill me. I'm not getting out of this, so why the fuck not? It reminded me a little bit of Dennis Hopper when he speaks to Christopher Walken's character in True Romance, where there's an acceptance that he's going to be killed. Yeah, I'm going to be killed here, so I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the piss out of this guy. You know, just lead him a merry dance, because he's going to kill me anyway. And, you know, Christopher Walken's character's actually got respect for him at the end of it. So I'm not really sure that Boddicker's got respect for him, but I don't think he expects him to be so kind of blasé in the face of
certain death.
Certain death, exactly. So Peter Bell is brilliant in that moment. Again, it catches me every time. The realisation in his face is like, oh shit. I just absolutely love it. And his death sequence has elements of Jesus symbolism in it. So Verhoeven said that he wanted to weave some of that in there. You know, it's not something that he sort of follows through on. So it's not like the story of Jesus or anything. But what you do get is this kind of martyr, you know, where he gets killed. You've got your kind of Mary Magdalene figure watching along at the side. Obviously, we know that he's resurrected. But there's moments here where he kind of does the whole spread eagle, the arms out wide, you know, as he's been shot. He gets shot in the hand. You know, they put a hole in his hand. But essentially, they don't put a hole in it. They actually like, blow it clean off. And also, interestingly, here they actually blow his arm off, you know, which is not in the theatrical cut. You know, it's in the director's cut where the first shot they take, pretty much with the shotguns, it takes his entire arm off. And there's a sequence later on in the film where they talk about, you know, we saved the other arm, you know, and Bob Morton gets upset with that because they want to have total bloody prosthesis. That is reinstated in the director's cut, and that sequence still really is amazing. And as I get older, and it's not as funny anymore. It's more tragic and kind of horrific. When you look at it, like 4 guys standing just firing, I mean, they must fire about good 10 rounds each in shotguns into this guy from almost point blank range. And the way his body's just disintegrating.
It reminds me of that scene in Platoon when he's getting like heavy machine gun fire. Oh, it's so grim. And now that I can watch it, you know, without my eyes covered and my ears covered, I can appreciate that.
It's brilliantly shot as well. There's moments where it just looks like bits are flying off him left, right and centre, just like debris, bits of body, bits of flesh just being blown all over the shop. And the fact that he's still alive at the end of it is just kind of crazy. I mean, you know he's wearing body armour, but it was terrifying torture, you know, that they put him through. And then, thankfully, in a respect, Clarence Boddicker actually puts him out of his misery. And that's one of the great shots in the film. Is you've got that, there's an animatronic, but you've got Murphy leaning back and it pans around all the way to the back of his head. It's a seamless shot. I'd seen the director's cut a long time ago, and it's like, how did they do that? That looks like a real guy. Because you don't have the kind of quality. You don't have like super HD, UHD or 4K or whatever. And you can see that it's actually an animatronic. Obviously, you find out from watching documentaries and stuff, but it's a fantastic shot. You just see the back of his head exploding. So yeah, there's a wee bit of Jesus symbolism in his character, but he's also got like this kind of Joseph Campbellian type hero's journey. You know, even though it's very quick, You know, it's not exactly Frodo, where he's got like 3-4 hour films to tell his whole story, but, you know, it is in there. Maybe not the classical interpretation, but I think it was good that one of the writers, I think Ed Neumeier, said that, you know, it has got this kind of Joseph Campbell story, but we thought that was too sort of trite and obvious. So we kind of, instead of going from A to B to C, we kind of went from A to F to J. So they kind of missed a couple of steps out, but, you know, essentially the sort of the elements of it are there.
Yeah.
Anything you say may be used against you.
Now, Peter Weller put an awful lot of work in before the film, working with a movement coach to get the Robocop movements.
So it was a movement coach from the Juilliard School, wasn't it?
Yep, so it was actually Moni Yakim, who was the head of movement at Juilliard. And they spent a long time developing this movement protocol that was centred around moving in a kind of serpentine way, so really smooth and fluid. They spoke about it being a bit like Tai Chi, and they would kind of like circle up on his opponents and have this really smooth motion. And what actually happened on set, they filmed all of the Murphy scenes, so the pre-Robocop scenes, just cop. They did all that stuff first, because obviously once they turned him into an animatronic, they couldn't go back. Proto-Robo. And then the suit was late. You know, all good films have
Classic.
got a really nice adversity, and then the prop was late, or the prop broke, or the prop went on fire. So the suit was late, so they didn't get a chance to actually rehearse in the suit before the takes. So it arrived on set, and they quickly realised that none of the movements that they'd practiced so thoroughly could be carried out in this suit. It was too constrictive, it was too bulky and cumbersome, and this caused a massive stushy.
I think they actually had to take a day away from it, didn't they?
Yeah, I think it was like 3 in the end.
Yeah, there was a lot of people getting in each other's faces and stuff because Peter Weller obviously put a hell of a lot of work in it, as you've just said, and any professional hates to think that they've just been wasting their time.
Yeah.
You know, especially when they think they've got it. Like I've done all this work, here we go, I've got it ready to go, let's film it, and they're like, nope, doesn't work. And we need to do it again. You know, and because of the time constraints, because they were going to be shooting in a couple of days, that's obviously raised the temperatures as well. So yeah, they had to take a couple of days away from it, and he had to rework it.
Yep. So they got Moni Yakim back. They flew him back out at very, very short notice. I imagine he got a wee backhand payment for that one.
Yeah, I'm quite sure he did.
And they had to basically rework all the movement. And the first thing that he did was actually just start stripping bits out the suit. So removing the joints, elbows, the back of the foot, things like that, just to free up the movement.
Yeah.
And then after workshopping it for quite a number of hours, they sort of realised that the way to make it work was to slow everything right down, to make the movement super deliberate, slow, have nice wee sharp pauses at the ends of movements. And they created this wonderful movement protocol that looks so realistic. Like, it looks like a robot on screen.
Yeah, as they say, I think necessity is the mother of invention, isn't it? So they just had to get this done in that short space of time, and they've come up with something amazing. And it's a fantastic physical performance by Peter Weller in there. And as you said, everything's done very slowly and deliberately, but they have those kind of wee mechanical pauses and stops, you know, to make it look like it's machine operated. And obviously the sound profile that they use in the, you know, all the whizzes and whirring and all that kind of stuff, that really makes it work. But it's not over the top, you know, it doesn't sort of go into street dancer type, you know, like robot
body popping.
Yeah, it doesn't kind of go that far, you know. It still looks like it's very smooth. Yeah. So it still looks futuristic. You know, if you look at something like the Boston Dynamics robot, the motions do look smooth, but they still look a bit mechanical and juddery, and there's kind of like aftershock when it stops, that kind of thing. They've got it to this point where Peter Weller actually looks really smooth, and when he stops perfectly still. Yeah. So it looks like it's really well controlled, and again, that makes it feel more futuristic.
Definitely.
You know, as opposed to a more kind of rudimentary robot.
Drop the gun, you are under arrest.
There's also an aspect to his character in this that's a little bit like Wild West figure. You know, like he's like the new sheriff in town type of thing. Yeah. I think it's funny that when he comes in the doors in Metro South, it's the swing doors.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it could have been a door with a handle that he opens and closes, right? But he actually pushes his way through these swing doors.
New sheriff in town.
And it's almost like a saloon. Yeah. You know, he goes in, there's like drunkards lying all over the place and prostitutes and all that kind of stuff all hanging over the desks. Yeah. And he goes up to the sort of the sheriff, so to speak, or whatever, the other marshal, whatever you want to call it, and introduces himself and gets given his badge and gun and stuff, and he's away. kind of thing. So, and obviously that point that he uses the gun trick,
Yeah.
you know, the TJ laser thing that he copies. I think that was supposed to be like a piss take of TJ Hooker.
Ah,
A William,
future Hooker.
William Shatner vehicle from the 80s.
I thought it was a discount clothing store.
TJ Hooker. Yeah, there's definitely a kind of Wild West influence in there,
Yeah.
the kind of this new hero.
Even the dead or alive, you're coming with me.
Exactly.
That's very cowboy.
But I love how they use that. The gun spin is kind of like a mark of his humanity.
Yeah.
And he's got triggers, quite literally triggers. You know, there's a gun spin and there's the dead or alive, you're coming with me. There's two moments that recall his humanity.
Yeah.
You know, and to the audience, to us, and only Lewis, when she sees him transformed into Robocop and she sees him do the gun flip,
Yep.
she realises it's him. And obviously when Emil meets him at the gas station and he says, you know, dead or alive, you're coming with me, he says the same line.
Yeah, he
And that's
realises.
right, he remembers who he is, and then it obviously then gives Murphy more flashbacks to his past. So that's really clever writing again as well there, where they've added those wee triggers in. They're kind of obvious, you know, but they're necessary. You know, they tell a story to the audience. You've got so many aspects to this character that I love about it. Like we said, the cowboy aspect. You've got the Joseph Campbell style hero. You've also got a wee bit of Frankenstein's monster in there. You know, like he's been created by man. And you've got that moment later on in the film where he actually gets chased away by the locals almost. You know, in the classic Frankenstein movie, they chase him away.
Pitchforks.
Yeah, exactly. And and he finds refuge in the windmill. And obviously Robocop finds refuge in a steel mill, in this one. So
Clever.
there's a wee bit of sort of mirroring there, possibly. But there's also the Jesus symbolism that he talked about as well. And there's that moment towards the end of the film where he actually appears to walk on water.
Yep.
You know, obviously it's very shallow, but it's the imagery is very clear that this is the kind of saviour.
And he gets a kind of spear in the side
And he gets a
as
spear.
well.
Yeah, exactly. He gets
Or
a
in
spear
the
in the
chest,
side.
but-
Well, it's kind of a chest side, but you know, it gets speared. That could have been anything. You know, it could have been a hammer or, you know, something else, a pickaxe or something like that. But they chose a spear, and I think that's a very definite callback
Reference.
to that story. Paul Verhoeven was a student of Christianity or, you know, the Bible or whatever. So, yeah, he wanted to add aspects of that in there because I think he felt like parts of the character lent themselves to that story. So it's aspects of
References
a
to-
hero or a saviour, you know. So the Frankenstein thing is about the kind of creation, the man and monster thing.
Resurrected from human flesh.
Exactly. And obviously you've got the Campbell style hero, you've got the cowboy. All these things are just like different heroic archetypes and tropes. And I think it's a really cool blend.
Yeah.
So yeah, those moments are like breadcrumbs of his identity, you know, that the gun trick and certain phrases that he says, and he obviously gets those images flashing in his mind of his family. I like that sequence where he takes his helmet off in the last third and you see Peter Weller's face for the second time, but obviously it's dramatically changed. And I think we'll get to it later, but I think that makeup job by Rob Bottin is just outstanding.
Absolutely banging.
There is no joins whatsoever. It still looks fabulous. But anyway, and he has that moment where he looks at himself in the mirror and he says he can feel his family, but he can't remember them. I think there's a lot of weight to that. And I think the music and his delivery really sort of lift it. They really elevate it. And without even being touched, you know, she's just about to put her hand on his shoulder and he just says, leave me alone, and just sits there. That seals it for me. Like, his performance all the way through is just fantastic.
Yep.
He goes through this whole gamut of emotions. You know, he starts off like fresh-faced, happy, family man, all that stuff, gets torn apart, gets rebuilt, and eventually sort of reclaims his humanity. This constant journey for him to reclaim who he was, solving the case, so to speak, as he goes. But right at the very end, you see him say his name, you know, I'm Murphy.
Yeah.
You know, he's no longer the product anymore. He's found who
His
he
sense
is.
of self.
His sense of self is back. And again, that starts to raise the bigger questions about what makes a man. Is it your memory? Is it your soul? Is it the body? Or whatever, you know, all those kind of things. So yeah, I think it's a fantastic character arc. And again, the way it was written and condensed into such a short time frame with all the other stuff going on. And also the fact that he's quite absent from a lot of the sequences.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's such a really strong presence throughout it, but he's also out of the film for large chunks. You know, when you get all the sort of corporate shenanigans and all the sort of villain shenanigans. So great performance by Peter Weller in this overall.
Yeah, without such a strong dramatic actor in that role, it would could definitely have sent this film into the realms of cheesy.
Did we talk about earlier about the previous castings, like people who were considered?
We haven't. So apparently the studio were quite keen on having kind of like a big action star playing the part. So someone like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Rutger Hauer.
Arnold Schwarzenegger would have been terrible in
Imagine. Dead or alive, you're coming with me.
But I mean, he'd also be typecast
totally.
Because of Terminator, he's already played a machine.
Exactly.
So yeah, I don't think it would have worked.
I don't think it would have worked. And I think Peter Weller's jaw is just really fantastic. The other thing that stood in his favour, apart from the fact that he was really good at acting, was his stature. So, he's quite a slim guy. He's quite a chiseled face.
Yeah, he's probably what you would say gaunt.
Yeah,
But he does look very, as you say, chiseled and very defined. He's got those, like, as you said, cheekbones that can cut glass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, apparently they thought he could adequately portray pathos in just his lower jaw.
Yeah, I mean, that's a challenge for any actor.
Absolutely.
You can only see half your face. The eyes are generally like something you would use a lot in acting. You would expect, like to convey emotion and all that kind of thing and intensity. And when they're completely covered and it's just a mouth, it's all about what you can do with your physicality and how you deliver stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Look at The Mandalorian, for example, Pedro Pascal. He gets props for just through gestures for like conveying emotion and intent and all that kind of thing. It's a really difficult skill, and similar to Batman as well.
Yeah,
where you've only got that kind of lower part.
Although you do get a little bit of eye.
You do get a bit of the eyes, but they're normally like blacked out, so you're kind of just seeing like the whites in the pupil. But yeah, it's a difficult skill to pull off. Yeah. And again, aesthetically, you need to have the face, the jaw.
And the other thing that was in his favour was he could actually fit into the suit. Although the suit was, cast for him, it was made for him.
Yeah.
A much bulkier actor would have, it would have been a much more challenging effort to create a suit for someone like that. And also, it would have totally changed the actual look of the character.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you look at the actual character on screen, you can see that it's quite big. Mm-hmm. And when you see what Peter Weller looks like in real life, he's kind of like Willem Dafoe, isn't he? He's that really skinny build. It looks way bigger than him. And if you had a bigger actor inside it, then that's getting bigger and bigger again. So you put Schwarzenegger in there, it would have looked ridiculous.
Exactly.
It would have looked like a box.
How is he supposed to drive about in a cop car?
He would just not be able to do it. Simple as that. You seen how big and bulky he was in Batman and Robin when he played Mr. Freeze. And this was an even bigger suit than that. It's a bit bigger and bulkier than that. And they hadn't refined the process of costume making in that respect back in the 80s. So to keep the profile looking sleek, as it did in the film, they had to have a really, really slight actor inside, but also one that had a great face and could also deliver dramatic lines, and make it sound and look good.
Lewis, come here when you finish fucking around with your suspect. On your feet.
Murphy's partner in Anti-Crime.
Anti-Crime? Is that Uncle Crime's wife?
Murphy's partner in Cop is Anne Lewis, and she's played by Nancy Allen, and she's a fantastic actress. Yep. She really is. I love her in Blowout. I love her in 1941. She's brilliant. But anyway, in this, she's absolutely great.
She is.
And she's the perfect foil. And I love the fact that there's no romantic interest in this. There's none whatsoever.
It's very refreshing.
So it is refreshing that a woman is not being used for her sexuality in a film. She's been used purely as a kind of heroic figure and a very strong, forceful figure at that.
Absolutely.
She is a sidekick. There's no doubt she's not the main character, but she's got a lot to do with how the character develops.
Yeah.
Like as I said earlier, she's the one who realises who he is.
Yeah.
And kind of snaps him out of it a little bit. Yeah, she's a really pivotal character in it, and she's got a lot of agency in the film as well.
Definitely.
She ends up killing one of the main bad guys at the end, and has a lot to do with Clarence Boddicker being brought to heel.
The audience and Murphy are introduced to her kicking ass and taking prisoners, quite literally, as she completes her arrests at the start of the film. So straight off the bat, she's introduced as this strong female character. And again, it's not that they make a big deal of it being like, oh, look at this woman doing all this fighting. It's just that that's the character and she's a woman. So again, it's another refreshing one for the 80s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very nonchalant, and you judging from the reaction, come here when you finish fucking around with your suspect. It's kind of like Lewis has done this kind of thing before and routinely does it. Like, she's a hard ass. And I think that's the great thing about everybody when you walk into that locker room. There's no separation between the men and the women.
Yeah.
It's just everyone together. They're all cops. They're all getting suited up. They all have they've all got the same job to do.
There's a wee quick moment where there's a wee bit of a flash of boob, but what's notable about that is that the men pay absolutely no attention to it.
That's right.
So it's almost done as a way of indicating that they are all equals. That was certainly how I felt.
Yeah, I think that's the way it was shot as well. It doesn't linger on it.
No.
That's the kind of thing that you maybe would linger on if you're trying to show that or sensationalise that. But it's just like someone getting dressed, she's putting on her body armour, I think
I mean, personally, I would have wanted need like a sports bra under that, but
but yeah, it just pans across like you say, and it's shot very deliberately to show that this is just men and women mingling. Everyone's equal here.
Let the woman go. You are under arrest.
So Nancy Allen really wanted this part, and when she read for Verhoeven, I think she was a wee bit nervous, and it didn't go according to plan. So she didn't think she'd got it. Someone else was hired, and then whatever happened
I think
in
it was
the background.
like a contractual obligation that the other actress had to fulfill.
Right, I see. So anyway, Nancy Allen ended up playing her, and she didn't know how to use a gun, so that was obviously going to be a problem for a police officer, especially in such a sort of bullet-heavy movie.
Yeah.
So she did a lot of training with a guy called Steve Estrada. I think he was the guy who trained Police Academy graduates. So she went down to the shooting range at the Police Academy and shot guns for a long time and ended up loving it. I think she said in that interview that her dad was a cop, so there was guns in her house when she was younger, and she was kind of scared of them. She kind of respected the power. But yeah, she wanted to become comfortable holding it so that when you seen her on screen, it didn't look like she was scared to use it.
Yeah.
That she knew her way around it, knew what she was doing. And it really does come across.
Yeah.
She does look very, very comfortable.
So it's capable.
And she is one of the strongest female characters in 80s film.
Yep.
Like alongside like Ellen Ripley and various others.
She's also got some crack timing with a bubblegum pop.
She certainly has. That was one of the things that Verhoeven asked her. He wanted her to chew gum.
And kick ass.
And kick ass.
And I'm all out of gum.
I think it gave her character this kind of nonchalant vibe.
Yeah.
That everything was just like another day at the office, that kind of idea. But he wanted her to be able to chew gum, blow bubbles, and also make that popping sound kind of on command.
Yeah.
It was almost like a full stop in one scene, where Murphy says, I'm going to drive, always driving a break in a new partner. And she looks at him with that kind of like disdain and then just kind of blows the bubble and pops it, and she walks off. And it was like a kind of full stop to that conversation.
Yeah.
And without her saying anything, it's like a fuck you.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
Like she could have just given him the finger there just as easily and had the same effect.